Thanks to Bill and to Jonathan and to all of those who have been providing special music while our choir is on their summertime Sabbath. So I love this story. That too. I love this story. It is the one place in the New Testament where we get a story about Jesus as a kid. What's your first thought when you hear this story about Jesus being separated from his parents? I made him literally answer at 8:30, and I got answers like, "You can't take your eyes off them for a second." Thankfully, there was no parent shaming. There's enough parent shaming in the world, especially on the 21st century internet. And I have no interest in shaming Mary and Joseph. I have enough challenges of my own raising a 12-year-old. I'm not about to second guess the mother of 12-year-old Jesus. I think these are good parents. We don't really know much about their parenting techniques. The one story we get, they kind of lose their kid. But I think they're good parents because each and every year they take this trip. They take this trip to Jerusalem. Now, I want us to be very clear. I want us to be very clear about this story. This story is in Luke's gospel, in the second chapter of Luke's gospel. And if you were here last week where we read out of Matthew's gospel, it's a very different story. In Matthew's gospel, they escape to Egypt. The Holy Family is on the run from crazy, angry, murderous Herod. But not in this story, not in the Luke story. In the Luke story, we have what seems to me like an annual spring break trip to Jerusalem for Passover. Part religious festival, part family reunion. And perhaps if you're a kid on this adventure, it feels a little bit like church camp. Think about it. An annual trip for a kid, centered around God, learning about faith, sitting with teachers, listening, asking questions. And Jesus here in this story, like a typical 12-year-old, is oblivious that his parents are kind of worried about him. Jerusalem must have been a safe place for him. The temple must have been a place where he felt comfortable to be away from his parents for 3 days, like camp is for some people, kids and adults alike. I wonder a lot of things about this story. Luke normally is a beautiful storyteller, and Luke doesn't give us much of the story here, but I wonder if Jesus had the same excitement about going to Jerusalem every year for this experience, like some kids I know feel about camp. I know a few kids who are now adults, and some of them are even clergy colleagues, who would have been just fine if their parents had left them at church camp, especially by the time they were 12 and at Cairo. Camp was their holy of holies, and they couldn't wait to get there, and they never wanted it to end. I have a clergy friend. We'll call her Sarah. And Sarah had shared a story with me years ago, and I asked her to write it down so I could use it this morning and share it with you. And I'm going to use Sarah's words because they're just that powerful, I think. And this was her experience from her senior year at CYF camp. And on the last night of church camp, we were having a communion worship service on the waterfront. And as I sat there in the dark, I had this realization that I would not be coming back to this place And if I did, never in this same way ever again. Church camp had become my safe place, my place of sanctuary. For me, church camp was the place where I really felt God for the very first time. It was the place where I began to understand what it meant to be one of God's beloved. So that night, in the dark, the fear of all of it overwhelmed me, because I knew I would have to leave this place where I had found God, and that I would in turn lose God. So in a rare moment, I teared up. Yes, I know that sounds crazy, because I didn't cry back then, and I refused to go and receive communion, because if I didn't go, then the night wouldn't end and I wouldn't have to leave. Now, I did eventually go and receive communion. I tried to make that night last forever. But what I learned is that there is a place that exists, a place of true love and acceptance, and that space only exists because of God. And it took me a while to realize that God exists in other places besides Athens, Texas. But at the same time, I carry those lessons of love and acceptance that I learned there with me throughout my life and my ministry. And I could tell lots of stories, just like this one, about kids being changed at camp, where camp is the one place where, as one friend of mine says, things always seem to make sense at camp. Even with all the crazy camp silliness that happens, people are kind and accepting at camp. I had another friend, I sent out a request for lots of why camp is temple for you requests this week, and I had one friend say, even the mean girls weren't so mean at church camp. She didn't say they weren't mean girls. She said they just weren't that mean at church camp. Where even when the showers are less than desirable and the bunks aren't so great and the superheat of West Texas nearly does you in, or the superheat of Bonner Springs, where our Camp Tall Oaks is. When the superheat nearly does you in, even then it feels like the most beautiful, wonderful place on earth. And I wonder if that's how Jesus felt. Where for him, that annual trip to the temple was like going to church camp, where he felt safe enough that he stayed even when his parents went home. Because it doesn't say that Mary and Joseph left him. It says that Jesus stayed. And I wonder how it impacted his entire life. I think about my beloved minister, Wally Brown, who just died a few weeks ago, who always said that he went into the ministry so that he could do church camp for the rest of his life. And he did. The last camp he did was with Ryan and me in the god-awful swamps of Athens, Texas. I mean, I know people think God lives there, and God probably does during church camp, but it's an awful place otherwise. I'm kidding. The last time he did church camp, he was 83 years old. He did church camp every year because he grew up. He grew up at Country Club just across the way here, going to church camp. And it became this essential time every year, this rhythm of his life where he knew he could reconnect, where he could get away. He could reconnect with God and himself and find a renewed spirit. And I wonder about Jesus. And if he became in this rhythm like that, with going every year with his family on this spring break trip to the Passover celebration. If that it created this rhythm in his life of renewal and rest. If it set the stage for the pattern that we see later on. Because Jesus continues to find these places of rest and renewal over and over again. And it's not about the space. It's not about the physical place. It's about spirit that we bring to the space. My friend Suzanne told me this week, I've been to church camp at 7 or 8 different disciples camps in 4 states. And I have always felt at home in each and every one. They're all different, but they're all the same. They all have those different elements that make it so holy and beautiful. And they might sing my songs a little differently than I do. But just the act of singing and the community built has the same spirit. And carrying that spirit through our life, finding places and ways over and over again. Maybe it's just time apart. That's why we've been exploring these vacation stories this month. Because time away is important. Jesus shows us that example again and again and again in Luke's gospel. But how do we carry that all the way through the year? How do we carry that feeling of rest and vacation, of wherever it is for you? I know for some of you, it's going to Santa Fe, and some of you, it's Bennett Springs, and some of you, it's a national park. And where is that space for you, and how do you carry it with you through the rest of the year? My friend Suzanne that I mentioned a second ago told me that she rediscovered that precious spirit just recently. She and her husband have baby Lydia, who's not yet quite 1. And as she grew into this space of being a mom, and she was rocking Lydia at night, she found herself singing the songs from church camp as a child. And here she discovered them in a new way. And yet that feeling that she would always feel at church camp came rushing back over her in the rocking chair of her nursery. There are lots of ways we can bring those tangible reminders home. Some of you know I went up to Clyde recently, a few weeks back. Clyde is a monastery for nuns. They're not exactly cloistered, but they don't ever leave. And I instantly felt at home, just like Suzanne says she felt at church camp. I'm afraid maybe I was a nun in a previous life. I don't know. I always feel at home when I walk into those places. And I sat in that space where for 105 years, women have been singing the Psalms. And it was church camp for me. It was renewal. It was God time. It was sitting and being restored. And I didn't want to come home. And I thought, how do I keep this? How do I carry this through? And so I bought one of the rosaries that the one sister makes. And I don't know, I'm not much for the crucifix. I'm more of a cross girl myself. I don't think we left Jesus up on that cross, but neither here nor there. But these beads for me have come to symbolize that sweet, sweet spirit that I found there. And for me, it's the tangible way of carrying that experience in the Holy of Holies into our everyday. And I wonder, as you're going on your vacations, maybe some of you are going to church camp. Some of our kids have already been to church camp. Some of you have already been on vacation. Some of you are getting ready to go on vacation. How do you bring that sweet, sweet spirit into your everyday life? That feeling when you don't want to come home. That sweet, sweet spirit, the holy place, wherever it is that you are, that we have to keep finding those places over and over and over again throughout our lives. Where are you finding that these days? How are you bringing that into your everyday life? I'm going to pray about that for you while I'm on vacation, hoping that you will find some rest this summer. As we conclude our sermon series on summer vacation stories, I'm hopeful that you are finding some rest. Maybe just a change of routine, maybe getting away. But I hope you will find some sweet, sweet spirit, and your soul will be restored. May it be so. May it be so for all of us.